Hi everyone, this is Alex from Investimation, and today I'll be taking you through a step-by-step guide to buying your first rental property. This is going to focus on smaller 4 units and less, which typically falls under conventional financing, but these concepts can be scaled up. Think of it like a lemonade stand. Once you do a lemonade stand, you kind of understand the core concepts of the business, marketing, customers, but it's very, very basic. And then you can scale from there to a larger business. And as the business gets more complex, the steps get more complex as well. For the most part, even with the first rental property, the process is very similar to buying your first home, with the exception that you think ahead of time more about your goals and cash flows, whereas your first home is going to be more of an emotional purchase. So you definitely want to leave emotion out of this. Otherwise, you'll probably lose money long term. You'll overpay for your properties, focus on the wrong improvements, and you will over-improve. You don't want to be the best house in the neighborhood unless you're in an A-plus area. It's hard to find a tenant willing to pay a premium when they can just go to a better neighborhood. You should start by deciding on your goals. Do you just want additional monthly cash flow? Do you want to replace your salary income? Do you care about appreciation? And is that appreciation more important to you than cash flow? If you're just getting started, you may not have other sources of income. Usually those types of investors will prefer cash flow. If you already are getting enough cash flow or have a pretty high salary and you don't really need additional monthly income, you're trying to lower your tax burden, you probably want to focus more on appreciation. Appreciation is more speculative, so treat it more like icing on the cake. At least that's how I like to do it. I don't go into a property just because of appreciation alone. I definitely try to find areas with both cash flow and appreciation. It's not easy finding those. Yeah, everyone's moving to Texas, everyone's moving to Florida, but you don't really know where in Texas people are moving or where in Florida, which particular neighborhoods, what's the Class A neighborhood, B, C. And that's basically why we put together an estimation map. Feel free to use that. You also want to pick a market, decide on risk tolerance. Do you want to invest in Detroit? Do you want to invest in San Francisco? Personally, I would invest in either of those two, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. Keep in mind that your goals may change depending on your circumstance. You start a family, something happens to a family member, or you need to relocate for work. Be flexible with the goals. Plans are nothing, planning is everything. I like to revisit my goals at least once a year. New Year is a really good place for that. Put together a Trello board, that's what I do, and just like throw everything on there. Another thing I do, have a 1-year goal, 5-year goal, and a 10-year goal. Again, you can use Trello for this. You can use Excel, Google spreadsheets. Start with 10-year goals and work backwards from there. You don't have to hit 100% of your goals. And if you are, you should probably set bigger goals. I find that the more ambitious goals work better. A good book on this topic is The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. The premise behind it is that bigger goals motivate you to think outside of the box and seek more aggressive opportunities, whereas mediocre goals simply motivate you to optimize your existing process. This book changed my perception of risk and motivated me to get into real estate to begin with. I highly recommend it. One of the first things I learned from Jim Rohn when trying to understand the millionaire mindset is the importance of setting goals. People who don't have goals don't achieve much in life. Treat it like a game. Don't do it by yourself. Start it with a family. Give each one a task, gamify it, put everyone in charge of something. Focus on progress rather than outcome. Next, you want to decide on location. And you probably heard the saying in real estate that location is everything. Pick location that's right for your risk tolerance and for your expectations. Some locations have cash flow, some have good appreciation. They're also cyclical. Just because the location is great today doesn't mean it's always going to be great. Neighborhoods improve, they decline. Cities are pretty much organic. If you're just getting started, I recommend B-class neighborhoods or above. They cash flow well in smaller cities. They don't cash flow well in larger cities. They're relatively easy to get started with. If you're going into C-class neighborhoods, indeed, those can be rough. In D-class neighborhoods, you can have drug dealers living there. If you're just getting started, you probably don't want to deal with those areas. They do cash flow well, but it's often not worth the extra pain. And I've been there. That's how I was first getting started. The other thing I want to say is don't limit yourself to one neighborhood. You'll be at the mercy of one market. You also might have a hard time finding properties there. Maybe a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of duplexes and you want to get a duplex. One other thing I want to suggest, if you are in a larger city, don't even consider single family. You are not going to cash flow with a single family in a city like Boston, San Francisco, New York, ever. Rent is usually the last thing to rise. Property prices are the first to rise. Next, you want to get your finances in order. Make sure you have a good credit score, minimize credit card debt, make sure you're not late with your bills, especially with mortgage. The more rentals you have, the harder it will be to keep track of all of them. So either put in an auto pay so you don't even think about it, or make sure to set yourself a date and just go on that date, pay off all your mortgages. What screws you over the most with your finances, with your credit score, and I've learned that the hard way, is when you have a delinquency. Even if it's because of failed auto pay, it doesn't matter. The bank will not take it down. You'll literally have to take them to court for them to remove it, even if it's their error. By the way, there's 3 credit report agencies: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. The credit score varies between them, and usually the lenders take the middle of the 3 or the lowest. It varies by lender. When you look at them, you'll notice that one of them does tend to be more optimistic. Now there's a regulation that they're required to give you a 1 annual report. So make sure to use that. Make sure that there's no issues with your credit history. If you need to dispute anything, there's actually public assistance lawyers in each city that may or may not do the service pro bono for you, depending on the situation. The other thing I'd recommend is, since there are 3 agencies, you can either get all credit reports at once. They're usually going to say the same thing, give or take maybe 1 or 2 events, maybe if there's an error on one of them. So if you get them all at once, that helps you see if there's an error on one of them that's not on the others. If you stagger them, which is what I recommend if you're not actually buying anything immediately, you get a better pulse over the year. Basically, every 4 months, you know what your credit score looks like. Put a date in your calendar, just request it. Yeah, it's a little bit of a hassle to do every once in a while, but if you're planning to do duplexes, triplexes for a while to get started for a few years, it's worth doing. Just get into routine. To actually request them, you can go on Consumer Finance. It's a government website. And if you have like a 30-day delinquency or 60-day delinquency on anything, it may take up to a year until you actually qualify for getting a loan. And usually 60-day delinquency follows you for a few years. You have to explain it when you're getting any mortgage. Credit cards also report late payments to the credit bureaus. And credit cards are the main reason many people's credit score sucks. It's very easy to borrow with a credit card without understanding the consequences. I personally think everyone should have to take a course on finances before they're allowed to get their first credit card. But if that was the case, credit card companies would be out of business. Utility companies usually don't report anything to the credit bureaus. And even the collection agency that works with them, it's more like NAGWare. I'm not trying to advise you to not pay your utility bill, but just saying that they usually don't work with them. Next, you want to learn how to underwrite. Know how to use an Excel spreadsheet and figure out what your income and expenses are going to be. A lot of people, when they get started, they're overly optimistic about their income and expenses. If you want to lose a lot of money in real estate, that's a great way to go. You want to be overly conservative with your underwriting, just like the bank. Something's always going to go wrong. You may be expecting rents that you're not going to get. Maybe something happens to the market. Maybe you expected that they were going to build a bus stop 2 streets over, and that never happened. A good place to learn how to underwrite is the napkin analysis video, which I'll upload shortly as well. And napkin analysis is available to anyone for free. You just need to register for an estimation account. You want to find the right lender. From my experience, lowest interest rate doesn't matter. That's initially what I was chasing. And yeah, it's nice to save like $50 or $100 a month, but the differences in rates won't be that significant from bank to bank. There'll be a much bigger fluctuation difference depending on when you buy the property versus on which bank you close with. What I did find is that different lenders have different standards. If they're a direct lender, they keep loans in-house, they may have easier standards, but even then, if they're expecting to resell the loan, they may not have those same standards. Local lenders usually have easier standards just because they keep the loans in-house. I'll also do another video on local lenders versus national lenders to explain the differences between the two. As you scale, you're probably going to be starting working with local lenders more. You do want to find the lender with the lowest down payment, so I try to get 20% down. For investment properties, if they're multifamily, you're usually going to be required to put 25% down. Most lenders, some lenders will allow you to do 20% down. So if you can do that, that makes a difference. I highly recommend it. The less you can put down, the bigger your ROI is. If your cap rate is negative, your ROI is going to be negative as well. So realistically, you just want to stay away from the deal entirely. But that's up to you, especially if you have a plan to improve the property. That may be a play for you. Another thing you want to look for is a lender who allows you the highest number of properties. With Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the limit is 10. So that's how many properties you can get with a conventional loan. Conventional loan basically means that it is insured by the government. Those loans tend to be lower interest rate. They tend to be longer, more flexible, because they know they can resell this loan to the federal government. A lot of banks that are not investor friendly will limit you at 4 properties. I'd stay away from those banks. They're probably going to be the most stringent. The more headaches the lender creates for you, the less likely you're to want to work with that lender as an investor, because you want the process to be fast. You want to repeat this over and over again, hopefully several times per year. If it's a pain in the ass to do, you're probably not going to refinance and buying properties as quickly. Next, you want to find the right agent. By right agent, I mean you don't want a house hunter type agent. First-time homebuyers fall in love with properties, so agents usually bring them to properties where everything is done, everything looks beautiful, but the property isn't really an investment. You're probably going to overpay for it, and the rent is going to be lower than your monthly expenses. So what does a good agent look like? They have to have a good eye, especially if you work remotely with them. They're supposed to be able to walk through the house, see if it has good bones. You want a property that's not sagging, not settling, not rotting anywhere. There's no termite damage. There's no foundation settling, especially the older properties if you're investing in Northeast. Where I like to go immediately when I go to the property is the basement, because that's where you see a lot of the issues with the property. In Texas, there's no basements there, but in Northeast, there's always going to be a basement. And it's kind of like looking inside of the person's mouth. Dentists will tell you that you can tell a lot about the person's health just by looking in their mouth. Same thing is true with the house. You can learn a lot about its health by looking in the basement. You'll see rot there, you'll see termite damage, you'll smell mold if it's there, you'll see if there's issues with electrical, you'll see if it's using knob and tube, some other antiquated system. Sometimes I've seen oil furnaces converted to gas. With the older models of those, it will kick the can probably in a year or two. With my second property, I wasn't careful and there was sill damage with a sill plate that the entire triple decker basically rests on started rotting. And the house started settling to the point where the floors were crooked by about half a foot in one room. We didn't notice this when walking the rooms. There was furniture there. Had I checked the basement better, had I saw the sill plate damage, I would have noticed that something's wrong here. Unfortunately, with this one, it only clicked a few weeks after I bought it. You also want a real estate agent who's patient. One thing they have to understand is that you'll be looking at a lot more properties than a typical home buyer. You're not going to fall in love with properties. A lot more properties are going to have issues like foundational issues, structural issues with them. And after you actually look at the property, or maybe it's much smaller, has an awkward layout, there'll be a lot of issues you'll be seeing with the properties, especially if you're trying to shop for a deal. There is a reason why it's a deal. There's probably something wrong with that property. If you can figure out how to fix that something, then that's your profit. One of my first properties, I bought it, had an awkward layout, this like L-shaped room where a bunch of space was wasted. I moved a couple walls around and I added a bedroom there. All of a sudden, I raised rent by $800. But like I said, you basically want a patient agent who'll be okay with looking at a dozen properties or more with you before you pull the trigger. What that agent has to understand is that you'll be a repeat customer. So you may need to see more properties before you pull the trigger, but you're going to be eventually buying multiple properties in that market. So the agent is interested in getting your repeat service. With that said, you don't get that benefit if you're buying one house in one market, one in another. That's why I recommend, if you're using Investimation to find a market, find one market, stick to that market for a few years, and afterwards go on another one. Don't buy one house in one city, one in another, because then you'll probably spend 80% of your time trying to figure out who your property manager is, who your handyman is, who your plumber is, who your electrician is. And it becomes a lot of hassle when you're doing it in multiple states and you're not local. So when you're local, that gets easier. When you're in one area, it gets easier. Stick to one geographical area, at least for a few properties, so you own a decent portfolio there, 5 to 10 properties, and then you can jump to another one. If you are buying out of state, you definitely need a property manager. Even if you're buying in state, as you scale your business, you'll find that you'd rather have the free time, your time is worth more, than saving the money. I know a lot of landlords who got started, they bought a couple duplexes and then they go on them on the weekend to fix the tile. And they think they're saving money, but at the end of the day, they're still stuck with 2 duplexes 10 years later because it's so much of a hassle to scale for them. You don't want to be that guy. So hire a team. As soon as something is below your pay grade, outsource it. And about property managers, I've done a whole video on property managers. how to find one, what to look for in a property manager. So go ahead and watch that as well right after you're done watching this video. You should just start looking, have a plan. Napkin analysis helps you with that plan, as I said, so do watch that video and do play with it a little bit. It's super simple. You can literally fill in 2 cells and the rest will autofill for you. And it will be wrong because it will not get your taxes right. It will not get your insurance correct until you put in the actual numbers, but you'll probably have a 10% error at most. But what you want to get used to is just start going through the actions, start doing the routine. Walk those neighborhoods if they're local. If they're not local, explore on Google Maps, give local people a call. Go on the website of Bigger Pockets, make a few connections, send those people a message, an email, say, hey, look, I want to get started in your area. I know nothing about it. You have 30 minutes to talk. Most people will be happy about that. I've spoken on the phone to people. I've exchanged emails with them. Most people in the real estate community are very friendly. You just want to get started. So start looking at the properties, start studying the areas. If you don't see any properties on the market that match the criteria, don't relax your assumptions. Don't try to save pennies. Things like inspection, attorney, broker, you may think like, oh, I'm just going to do it myself, or I'll waive the inspection because it's like, what, $700. Think of these minor expenses as insurance against bigger problems. I tried to save on everything when I was first getting started and would usually end up paying extra when I ran into issues later. Lately, I don't do the inspections with an official inspector just because I noticed that they're more tailored towards the homeowners. They like to create pretty reports. They don't really like to look for problems in the properties. They want people to be happy with their properties and to think they got a good deal. What I usually do is I grab my general contractor with me and I go with him. For me, because he gets a lot of business for me, he does it for free. If you know that there's going to be a lot of repairs, a lot of general contractors will do it for free because they're going to be expecting that you give them that business. It's okay to go slow. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So as long as you get moving and start doing something, even if you're buying one property every 10 years, it's okay. You don't have to be the Brandon Turner of Bigger Pockets. You can go as fast or slow as you want. What you'll notice in a lot of larger cities like Boston, like New York City, a single triplex is oftentimes better than your entire 401k plan. And it seems counterintuitive, but unlike retirement, it also generates cash flow if you bought right. And that cash flow is as if your retirement was paying you a little bit extra each year. So it gets easier and easier to accumulate more in your retirement. But what you should really do with the extra cash is just buy more real estate. So this is the BRRRR strategy. The BRRRR strategy is basically buy, rehab, rent, and refinance. And refinancing is another thing I'll talk about later. It's a good way to pull money out of the building without having to pay taxes on it or without having to sell it. So what a good prudent investor does is they hold the property forever and they just extract more money out of it using refinancing. Eventually you may choose like to 1031 exchange this property into somewhere else. 1031 exchange basically means that you're deferring the taxes and you're rolling them into the next property. So your purchase cost basis for that property is lower. It's based on the original purchase of the original property, but you're just not paying that tax now. You're deferring it until you sell the last property. If you never sell, you never pay the tax. Or if you do sell, use a 1031 exchange, so invest into something bigger. You don't need to be number one. Even if you get started, you'll notice several years from now, you'll already be way ahead of your friends who don't invest in real estate at all. And if you buy 2 or 3 triplexes, you're realistically probably going to be in the upper middle class bracket, even if you don't do anything else, if you just have a regular job. After 10, as I said, you probably won't be able to get conventional lending, but there's other options available. There's umbrella lenders, or you can just decide to go to apartment buildings or something larger, which I'll make a separate video about later. That's it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe.